Now it's time to hear the stories of Utes in their own words. This is Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. Here's your host, Mike Legasholt.
Hello once again, everyone, and welcome to the show as we wrap up the month of August in 2020. Been a good month of shows for us. We started things off with Ron McBride and a great look back at his coaching career of the Utes for 13 years and his development of the Utah football program as we really have come to know it in recent times. And then after the cancellation of fall sports in the Pac-12, we caught up with Yogi Roth of the Pac-12 networks to break down how this fall might look, the possibility of spring football, and also to get a 30,000-foot view of the Utah football program from Yogi. He's been around the Utes for a lot of recent years and some great insights from him. And then for today's show, I thought with all the rough news we've had in recent weeks, we want to go to a happy spot today. And I thought, what better place to go to than the 2008 Utah football season and a conversation with former linebacker Mike Wright. The Utes back in 2008, the last undefeated team in school history, a 13-0 record, a victory over Alabama in the Sugar Bowl, and a number 2 final national ranking. And Mike Wright, despite being one of the guys on that team who did not play at the next level, in fact, there were 9 guys from that defense who went on to the NFL. Mike was not one of those, but he was a key contributor, and Mike really took a different path. At that point in the program, Utah was not in the Pac-12. They had to rely on preferred walk-ons, some under-recruited guys. Mike was among that group, and they brought him in after transferring from Southern Utah, developed him, and he ended up being a 2-time all-conference pick for the Utes. But he was really part of what the program was at that time. Guys who came in, worked hard, developed, and then became a major contributor. Some of them, like himself, became all-conference type players for the Utes. So a good conversation with Mike Wright on just the evolution of the Utah football program and Kyle Whittingham's early years to that 08 Sugar Bowl run. Should be a fun conversation. Former Utah linebacker Mike Wright coming up in just a moment.
To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah Athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
All right, trivia question for all of you. Who was the leading tackler on Utah's 2008 Sugar Bowl team? Was it Paul Kruger, Koamisi, Stevenson Sylvester? It was none of those guys. In fact, it was the guy who is my guest on today's podcast, Mike Wright, former Alabama mentioned All-Mountain West linebacker for the Utes, who played from 2006 to 2009. And he was the top tackler on that Sugar Bowl team with 81 stops that year as Utah ran the table 13-0. They went to number 2 in the final poll. And Mike Wright joining us now from the home office. Mike, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Lags. Yeah, no, I appreciate that intro. I knew back then that that would be like the only thing that I'd ever be able to hold against those guys that you just mentioned, and a lot more other guys too that didn't quite make that list. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad to have that title. I take pride in that and appreciate that.
Well, great to have you with us. And you and I got to know each other a little bit more when we were working up at the U. You were in the group ticket department, group sales, and so forth. But hey, I wanna set some parameters, Mike, before we get going. There was a time when I was calling the games and hosting our weekly coaches show, and there was one night where you and I went to the barbecue joint, and we had yourself and maybe 1 or 2 more players there. And with the guys coming on, I know some are nervous and some haven't done a lot of live interviews, so I always tried to preface my questions with some directions of where they could go with the answers and try to set them up. And I don't want to say the guy's name to embarrass him, but I got the dreaded one-word answer, Mike, from him. It was a simple yes. After a lot of talk here on my end, and I probably didn't help. I just looked at him and I'm like, please give me more. And everyone had a laugh. So Mike, here's the deal. No one-word answers on this podcast, okay? Can you do more than that for me?
Yeah, I can do that. And I actually remember what you're talking about. I'll leave them nameless as well. But yeah, I remember the question was we had just beaten Air Force and we held them to 85 yards rushing or whatever, or something, maybe less than that. And yeah, I remember that for sure. And it was just you'd set up the question perfectly. How are you guys able to limit them to all, those yards? And he was just we tackled good. Or I can't remember.
I was so stunned I can't remember his answer. I just remember it was very short. And I'm I was expecting this insightful long explanation of the what and the why, and didn't get anything. So that was kind of fun. But that was a lot of fun back in those days doing those shows, and it was quite the run. As I broadcast the games from 07 until 09, that covered the bulk of your career. Mike, I kind of want to obviously talk about the 08 Sugar Bowl season and obviously a great year in 09 to wrap things up for you and the guys you played with and get some insight from you. But let's kind of start, what brought you to Utah? You grew up in Bountiful, big time high school athlete in football and baseball, I remember. And you started out at Southern Utah from 04 to 05, and you came to the U actually as a walk-on. So what led you to become a Ute as a walk-on back in 2006?
Really, it was the coaching staff for me that ultimately helped me made that decision. So I think Southern Utah maybe had the best coaching staff of any program at the D1 AA level at that point in time. So the main coach that was recruiting me was Aaron Roderick from my time at Bountiful. And then when I went down and Gary Anderson was the head coach at the time at Southern Utah. And then Kalani Sataki, Tuyaki was a player on that at SUU. And so, those are names that, people in, football fans in Utah have grown up knowing and are still currently working in the state and
right.
No longer with Utah, but those coaches really had an impact on me. And I, was fortunate that my time at Southern Utah, I redshirted there. I was on the practice squad and just, went to work every day and impressed, namely Aaron, and Kalani. And so when I got home from my mission, serving an LDS mission, they were the first guys that I called. And, they wanted me to come up and earn, just with that circumstance that I was in, going from the D1 AA level, they weren't ready to offer me a scholarship. I had to come on and earn it. But, those guys, those coaches were the ones that gave me the confidence that I could compete, at the D1 level and then ultimately earn myself a spot. So, those coaches were definitely influential in getting me up at the U.
Yeah, you mentioned those names. I mean, Gary Anderson, Aaron Roderick, Kalani Sataki is like the bulk of that staff came from SUU to Utah and joined Cal Whittingham, and you came with them. But it worked out well for you. But, as a guy who was, at SUU, 1AA, and then a chance to go to Division I, but no scholarship. I mean, did you have any trepidations about making that move, wondering how it was maybe going to work out for you?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there was some concern there that, there was maybe some pressure to stick with, the guarantee as far as, the scholarship that I had earned at that level. But just my personality and my competitiveness, just getting the opportunity. So for me, I mean, without getting too much into my story, I guess, is that, I didn't play high school football until my senior year. And so just getting the opportunity to play at the next level was an accomplishment in and itself. And just really didn't know what my ceiling would be. I just had a great high school coach and Coach Larry Wall at Bountiful, and helped prepare me and put myself in a position to be considered and earn a scholarship at the next level. And just really was kind of getting my feet wet, so to speak, from a football perspective. And maybe had I played all 3 years of high school and, went and did all the camps and things of that nature, that maybe I would have positioned myself to get a scholarship out of high school, out of school like Utah. And so I just hadn't quite got my potential or understood, where I would be success, or, what my capability would be as far as being able to compete and at the D1 level. And so, I just had a great support system. My parents were a big support to me during that time, and just, letting me know that, they'd cover my expenses as far as going to school, and with the goal in mind of earning myself a scholarship in a year or two. And Even at my time as a walk-on, there was, doubt that came up, but just kind of stuck with it. And ultimately, Coach Whittingham and the rest of the coaches on the staff, I was lucky enough to get awarded a scholarship after my sophomore year. And, I wouldn't trade the experience. I mean, I would have definitely loved to have been a scholarship player for, all 4 years, but I think being that time as a walk-on made me want it, made me hungrier, and just, made me come to work each and every day those first couple of years at the U. And, I wouldn't trade that, that experience of earning that scholarship that way for anything. So I appreciated, how the process, I should say, Coach Whittingham would call that the process.
Right.
I guess I learned to relish the grind and respect the process that, came with that.
Visiting with former Utah linebacker Mike Wright, who played from 06 to 09 for the Utes. And, Mike, back at that time, having walk-ons join the program, earn a scholarship, and really play a lot was pretty common. I mean, they were building the program. They were back in the Mountain West. It's not like it is now where you've got a bunch of the 3- and 4-star recruits coming in during the Pac-12 era. I mean, what you went through was pretty common back then. But obviously, when you come to program, you look at the head coach, you look at the staff. You knew the guys that you mentioned earlier on with Gary Anderson here and Aaron Roderick and Klein Sataki and so forth. But, Coach Witt, how much did he sell you when you made the move up north to join the Utes? How much did he sell you on what your role could be and what the program was going to do at that stage?
Well, I think, so we were just coming off, or the U as a program was just coming off, Urban Meyer and the Fiesta Bowl year. So my freshman year was 2006. That was Coach Whittingham's second year as head coach. And so I think the excitement around the Fiesta Bowl team and just being able to continue that success was exciting. And just, once, the original BCS Busters from that Fiesta Bowl team, there's a lot of excitement around, Utah football. And so, that made it really easy for me. And just getting the idea that, we, not only would you be competing at a D1 level, but, opportunities to, really at the national level compete and, be in the top 25 year after year and, things of that nature. So that all of those were great selling points for me. And, Coach Witt from that perspective, I mean, with, working or recruiting at, walk-on, preferred walk-on type level, I didn't spend a ton of time with him specifically, but just, kind of laid out the plan in place. And as I came on as a player and, was able to showcase what I was able to do early on, Coach Witt and the other coaches, made it very apparent to me that they were recruiting and, had intended for me to earn that, that starter spot, and be in that position. And so their recruiting priorities and things of that, they had communicated that to me, that I still had to earn it, but, that was well within my, capability, as a player to come in and step into that role. But, so yeah, I mean, Coach Witt was, I guess, had that early success as his being the head coach and being here for such a long time, really established, some confidence in for me to come in and be able to earn myself a spot. And, as you mentioned, at that time, walk-ons, was kind of a little bit more commonplace. And that was probably due to a lot of those guys were from the state of Utah and, compared, that was 15 years ago. I feel like we were kind of, myself and, other teammates that I had, like Braden Godfrey and Christian Cox and, other names that were, Casey Evans and guys that were, the Steve Tates of the world. I could go through a long list of guys that had, joined Utah as a walk-on and ultimately became all conference players, not only starters, but all conference type players. And, Coach, that's a testament to Coach Witt of establishing a culture that allowed for that. And I think a lot of it was, Utah program and Coach Whittingham, but also just the under recruitment of the state of Utah. I think, myself and my former teammates have really, helped put Utah football as far as high school recruiting on the map. And you see, when my senior year, there was one kid from from Utah, that one or two players that made or got Division I scholarship offers, and then that's just no longer the case here in the state of Utah. We proved as other, as my peers and other players in Utah high school football at that time, that we probably deserved a little bit more attention and those scholarships right out of high school. But I think now Utah high school football is a little bit more on the map. They're being more heavily recruited, and players are not only getting recruited by, the D1 programs here in the state, but also, other schools like USC, Michigan, Stanford, all those other programs are now recruiting more heavily out of Utah. So it's been interesting to see how that's progressed over the years.
Yeah, it's certainly a different deal now than it was then, but you're right. Back during those years, Urban Meyer was at Utah from 03 to 04. Whittingham took over, and he certainly had a plan to build the program the right way and for the long term. So 2006, your first year, the team went 8-5. They went to the Armed Forces Bowl in Fort Worth to play Tulsa. And then your second year, 07, at that point, you're starting to play a little bit more on defense and middle linebacker. And that 07 year, I remember talking to Coach Whittingham in his office with Frank Dolce before the 07 spring game. And we just said, hey, what does this team look like in the fall? I said, we should be pretty good. But really, 08 is a year where I think it could come together, because he had a lot of guys who were on that 07 team who were just going to be a year older. You had Brian Johnson to be a senior quarterback. He just felt like that 08 team was kind of where all the pieces he'd been putting together, from 05, 06, 07 to 08 were going to come together, and you were part of that equation. So that 07 season kind of set things up. That team won 7 games in a row before a loss to BYU. They beat Navy in the Poinsettia Bowl by 3 points in a thrilling win. But it was all set up for that 08 season, Mike. And, as you and the rest of the guys were going through spring practice in 08 and in the summer, what was kind of the talk amongst yourselves in terms of what you expected out of that 2008 season?
Yeah, I think our success for 2008 really stemmed from I'll never forget the game in 2007 where we went down to UNLV, and we had lost. 2007 was an interesting season because we had lost Matt Asiata, Brent Castile, our starting running back, starting our Brian Johnson got hurt for a while.
Yep, first game of the year, he went down with Asiata at Oregon State.
Yeah, and then we had lost Brent. So most schools that lose their starting quarterback, number one running back, and top receiver. I actually remember a cartoon that was drawn either in the Salt Lake Tribune or the Deseret News, but basically it was just like that our season was down the drain kind of thing. It was just kind of. It was like an injured football player with all these injuries everywhere, and it was like he was heading to a trash can or something like that. And so we went down and we lost 28-0 to UNLV. Frank Summers from UNLV had 200 plus rushing yards and just ran all over us. And then from that point, that was a turning point in our season. We just kind of had a come to Jesus moment in the locker room at that point, and just made a commitment to each other as team, as a team, and to the coaching staff that we would be ready to play each week. And just because we felt like we just, for whatever reason, weren't ready to play that week against UNLV. And so from that point on, that's when we went on a 7 or 8 game winning streak, in that 2007 season. Don't want to spend too much time on that game against the team down south where, I think it was that was the 4th and 17 year.
Mm-hmm.
We from that point on, though, and that, aside from that, bad stretch of a minute where we ended up losing that game against BYU, we had found a way to win and kind of came up with this winning formula week after week. And so heading into that 2008 season, we were very confident in what we were able to do, and just felt like we could compete with anybody with that winning formula. And so that I feel like that's what really set us up for that season, was just the success that we had after we had met with all that adversity early on in the season in 2007. And so that was kind of the talk was, we kind of figured we kind of thought we had figured it out, kind of thing, and just knowing that we had all those guys coming back, we were all going to be healthy, and just felt like we could, as we were looking at our schedule, felt like we could compete with, and no reason in our minds why we couldn't compete and win each of those games in our schedule and going into that 2008 season.
Yeah, Mike, Coach Whittingham talked about that 07 season quite a bit in relation to how things went in 08. He said, sometimes your worst moments can lead to your best, and to lose Brian Johnson, to lose Asiata and Castile early in the 07 season, you lose at Oregon State, you lose at home to Air Force, you start out 0-2, you had Tommy Grady have that great game against UCLA at Rice Eccles, but then you mentioned the loss at UNLV, 27-0. Brian Johnson, I believe, came back and played the second half against UNLV, but it didn't matter, and it just wasn't there. But you're right, it seemed like at that point that team and really the program turned a corner, and outside the fourth down breakdown in Provo against BYU was just a great 9-game stretch to end that season. And as Coach Witt told Frank Dolce and myself in the spring of 07, really 08, it all was set up in terms of your skill guys. Brian Johnson was back, Asiata was back, Castillo was back. The personnel was set up, and it's with Whittingham, it seemed like it always started with defense. He was a defensive coordinator in that group. You look at the guys on that defense, Mike. I mean, Paul Kruger, Koa Misi, Derek Shelby, Stevenson Sylvester, Robert Johnson, Sean Smith, Bryce McCain, R.J. Stanford, Brandon Burton, all of those guys, all 9 guys made it to the NFL. And at the time, we knew it was a pretty good unit, but to have 9 guys from that group play at the next level really talks about the level of talent in the program at that time. Were you aware sort of when you were playing along those guys that, hey, this is a pretty talented team, or did the numbers over the years in terms of next level success kind of sneak up on you a little bit?
No, I mean, we definitely knew some of those guys were going to get an opportunity at the next level. I think, there were some dark horses in that group, like, guys like Bryce McCain, who had the speed to play at the next level. Turned out to have a great career, played, had a great extended career in the NFL. So I mean, we definitely knew that we had the talent there, and there were, there's probably a handful that you knew was going to make it. And you had some other guys that fell in the category of like, hey, they're going to get a shot. And then, like I said, with Bryce, ultimately, and even, Sly and Derek Shelby were probably those guys that you weren't like, think that they were automatic, guys that are going to make it in the next level. But, when they got their shot, they turned, they made the most of it and had a great career. But yeah, no, it was a fun defense to be on. I mean, all those guys and all the talent that we had on that team. And there was, other guys like Kanape Iapo and Greg Newman. And Keppa Geisen was a guy
right.
that was a walk-on punter at the time, and turned out to be a serviceable starter for us. And Greg Newman was an undersized defensive tackle that was competing with guys that were 60, 70, 80 pounds heavier than him, and he was giving them fits. I love watching the Sugar Bowl and watching Greg play against Alabama, and all the he was in that backfield more than Glenn Coffey or Mark Ingram was. And it was just a fun group of guys to play with. I mean, you made mention at the beginning of this that I led the team with 81 tackles, which I think we need to go back and maybe ask, official statisticians revisit all those. Because that seems, but I mean, that's a relatively low number as far as someone leading a team with tackles.
Right.
And that was because we were a quick defense, and it was we had a lot of speed on our side of the ball, and it was almost like a competition of who could get to the ball first, where a lot of defenses are designed with, with big defensive linemen that eat up blocks, and then that frees up the linebackers and the safeties to come down and make those plays. That wasn't how our defense was designed. We had undersized D tackles. We had, Derek Shelby as a freshman was probably 250 pounds back then. Greg Newman was maybe 250 pounds as our starting D tackles. And then you had Koa and Paul on the edges. And, we were undersized up front in our front seven, but with our speed and athleticism, we gave offenses fits, and it was just a race to get those tackles. And wasn't the years after, that wasn't the design of that was just Coach Whittingham utilizing our personnel, and utilizing that talent that we had. The defense is set up more. There's bigger defensive tackles now. Even right after us. I always wanted to know what it was like to play with Star Lotulelei, because he was, as I was watching him on film, he was, eating up two or three different blockers all the time. And the linebackers behind him were just freed up to make plays all day, and similarly with the most recent team with Lucky Fotu and, others on that defensive line. They're just bigger. And the scheme's not quite the same as it was when we were playing. So, it was, definitely a good group of guys, and we knew we had a lot of talent and knew that we were going to compete with anyone that we were playing that year.
Yeah, it was definitely a group that plays a collective group. It wasn't one particular guy or set of guys. You had 81 tackles. Sylvester had 73, Cole Meese 68, Joe Dale, I forgot to mention him, had 66, Paul Kruger, who had an NFL career, had 61, Newman 50. So there were a bunch of guys who contributed, and that unit played so well that season as a group, one of the best in the country with 29 sacks, 85 tackles for loss, and just came up so huge during that undefeated 08 season. Let's talk about the season a little bit here, Mike, as we visit with former Utah linebacker Mike Wright, who played for the Utes from 06 to 09 and was a big part of that 2008 Sugar Bowl team. You had the opener in Michigan that year, Mike, and with all the hype and everything that was coming with that team and about that team during the summer, if you go to the big house and lose that opener, all of a sudden, all this talk is for naught. So for you guys to have that opener in the big house on ESPN, that was a chance to make a statement. You guys won that game 25-23. It was a statement. What are your memories of that victory against the Wolverines in Ann Arbor, August 30th, to start off that 2008 season?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, when I as a player, I was just most excited about getting to be able to travel to the big house. Growing up, turn on College Game Day or college football in the morning, you're always going to get a day college football game of Michigan.
Yep.
And so getting that opportunity to play in the big house, felt like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And it was interesting when you get there, the big house is kind of underwhelming just as a building, just like, it's obviously it's obviously big. But like what you build it up to be in your mind is something more than what it is physically.
Yep. No, it's all bleacher seating. It's very, it's so flat. It's got a ton of seats, but the sight lines are very flat, and it goes back a long way. So as you stand on the field, it doesn't look like 100,000 seats. You're right. It's kind of, in some ways, almost underwhelming when you walk in there.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I thought it was cool, just walking out pregame warmups, just excited to get the season rolling and all of that, and just kind of had that thought of like, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. But, come kickoff, those seats filled up, and, there was definitely 100,000 people in that stadium by the time the game rolled, because they were Michigan had at that time was just, I believe, hired Rich Rod. I think that was his first
year. Yep.
And so there was some excitement from their fan base for, maybe kind of turning the corner and, hopefully wanted to get started on the right foot with Rich Rod being their new head coach. And so there was a lot of excitement in that game from their perspective. And so, it was a huge game for us. We felt like at the end of that game, we should have won by 2 or 3 scores. We felt like we left a lot on the table as far as that was concerned, but ultimately a win's a win. And we were excited to go into a stadium like, the big house, get a win on the road. and get started on the right foot with that season.
You're right. You guys were up in that game against Michigan 25-10 going to the fourth quarter, and it was Rich Rod's first game. Fans really didn't know what to expect. He came in with a different offense, and it was sort of a contrast in some ways to what Michigan had done before. Was less of a line up and pound the ball, was more of a wide open offense with some mixed results in that first game. They came back, made it tight, but you're right. You guys had a comfortable lead going to the fourth quarter, but you win that game in Ann Arbor 25-23. You handle UNLV in Salt Lake a week later, 42-21. You throttle Utah State and Logan 58-10. To me, one of the first kind of statement games, gut checks that year was at Air Force, Mike, on September 20th. Air Force with that option can always be a handful. You guys, as a defense, held them to just 53 yards, but the Utes needed a late touchdown by Darrell Mack, a 9-yard run with under a minute to play to get the win there. What do you remember from that conference opener at Air Force? Actually, it was your second conference game. You beat UNLV, but that game at Air Force, your second conference game, felt big to me. What do you remember about that win against the Falcons?
Yeah, just a tough, gutsy win. Air Force is always tough. I played Air Force 4 times, and you just knew it was always going to be tough. We spent our bye week preparing for Air Force every year, just because our defense was just going to be, our defensive approach was just going to be different than against Air Force than it would be any other team. We spent time in spring ball, getting ready for Air Force. So I think when we went to the Pac-12, I think Coach Witt was relieved and excited that Air Force was going to be off the calendar every year. But yeah, that game in particular, just we felt, like I said, as I was talking about before, with the speed that we had on our defense, we were able to close those running lanes quick, and keep up with the option attack, and just we held them to that limited each one of those runs. Unfortunately, we gave up a lot of passing in that game, as I remember. A lot when you're talking about Air Force. And I remember there was maybe 2 or 3 chunk passes that had happened, but just a gutsy win. And Air Force was always a tough team, and it was it's always a good experience. That game was at Air Force, and so to be on campus at the academy was a cool experience. One thing I'll tell you, it is as a fun story, I guess, is that I was fortunate enough as a linebacker to not miss any time due to injury, but with all the tackles and running around and avoiding cut blocks that you had to do against Air Force, I dislocated my pinky during one of the tackles. So I looked down at my hand, and I had made the tackle, went back to the huddle, was looking to Coach Anderson for the next play call, and I looked down at my hand because my hand was kind of starting to hurt. And I looked down at my hand, and my pinky on my left hand was making a 90-degree angle to the immediate left, and the rest of my fingers were looking straight. And so I didn't have a lot of time to react to that as Air Force was coming. I think the next play was a 3rd down play. So I just quickly snapped my finger back into place, and then went and made a tackle on the sideline, and then ran up to our trainer and said, I think I'm going to need some tape on this hand, on this finger. And I try to, I say that calmly now. I was a little bit more intense back then, but not much. But just kind of those fun little injuries that you have to deal with during a game. But and then just was never really too concerned about losing that game. But just the Air Force battled. Just knew it was going to be a tough game, and watching Darrell Mack get that touchdown to seal the game was huge. And with Coach Calhoun, I think was his name, Coach Calhoun of the Air Force. He came onto our bus afterwards, after the game, and he just congratulated us and wished us well. And he said that he thought that we were one of the best teams that was going to be in the conference or in the country at that point. And so that was kind of an interesting, from his perspective of just probably watching film against us and just, how we played in that game. That that didn't typically happen. Coaches don't do that.
Yeah, Troy Calhoun, class guy, absolutely.
Yeah. So he came onto our bus before we head to the airport, and I'll never forget that. That was the only time that ever happened in my career, and so that was kind of I didn't really think too much of it then, but now I think back on it, that might have been an early indication of the talent and how good our team was that year.
You're right about Air Force. They threw for 138 yards that day, ran for just 53 on 42 carries, and it was a couple chunk plays in that game. But you guys got the win, and it kept things moving. You take care of Weber State at home, 37-21, and then another big game, Oregon State, which the week before had defeated number 1 USC. So the Beavers come to Rice-Eccles, Thursday night game, and if anyone is well versed on Utah football history, that's the game that Sakota booted the winner to take down the Beavers 31-28. But it was sort of an odd deal, Mike, where Oregon State wasn't very smart with their clock management and actually gave you guys a chance to win that game on offense as Brian Johnson, with a 2-minute drill, drove the team down the field, and the Utes were down 28-20 in that game with 2:11 remaining. Got you a touchdown. The field goal by Louis wins the game. You had a huge night in that game with 15 tackles, which was career high at that point, and a big sack of 9 yards in the first quarter. But that was another signature win that year. Oregon State again coming off of the big win over USC the week before. You guys down them at Rice-Eccles, and Mike, I can still remember the sensation of being in the press box that night when that kick by Sakota went off his foot. You could just feel collective inhale and the air being sucked out of the stadium as it went through the goalpost. The explosion of this, I can still physically feel it, of everyone exhaling at the same time and cheering as that field goal went through the uprights to win at 31-28. What a moment, one of the best in our school's history for a home game. What are your memories of that win over Oregon State back in 2008?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of my favorite games. Obviously, as you mentioned, that was one of my career nights. I just remember being super active and just felt really good about my reads and what I was seeing from their offensive line. They ran a lot of power run plays with Jacquizz Rodgers in the backfield, and he was like 5'2" or just a little guy. Just a little guy. I don't know how tall he was. I mean, that's probably a little bit short, but he was definitely just a little guy back there, and it was hard to see over the offensive line. So you just really had to read your keys of what you were seeing from the movement from the linemen, and just do your job as far as filling your run responsibilities. And just from my perspective, that game, making 15 tackles, that was I was just doing my job and filling my responsibility, and that's where that was the point of attack for Jacquizz. And so I remember for that game, just kind of the initial, going from the 2007 season into 2008 season, we talked about that. We'd had, one thing that I'll remember was that was Brian Johnson's first. Well, I mean, he had that clutch drive against Air Force, as we talked about a little bit, as far as sealing that victory. But really, clutch Brian Johnson came out initially in that game against Oregon State. We were down 8 that before setting up Louis for that game-winning field goal, and fans were starting to leave the stadium. We were down 8 in the fourth quarter with 3 or 4 minutes left, and probably most everyone expected us to lose that game at that point. But Brian, I think from Brian's perspective, he wasn't. He kind of picked his moment. He definitely had his moments over the course of that year where, he turned it on. There was times that he struggled over the course, during games, but at the very end of the game is kind of when he had figured it out, and that was Oregon State was definitely that one game, or that first game where we saw Brian kind of turn it on and with his clutch performance and led that drive, and I think which ended with Colt Sampson with a touchdown, if I remember right, or Brian ran it into it for a touchdown.
It was Braden Godfrey with the 25-yard touchdown, and then Brian ran for 2. You're right, and then the field goal by Louis from 37 away. Yep.
Yeah. So Brian ran it in with 2-point conversion. That's what I'm remembering.
Yep.
But yeah, just that was that was awesome. That was an awesome moment and then we scored and we got the 8 points and then there was like a minute 30 left. And like you said, Oregon State just really had poor clock management that got us the opportunity, win that game in regulation. Most fans that maybe left the stadium, probably had to, recheck their radio dials or, make sure that they were listening to the right game, because they probably weren't expecting, that Utah won by 3 in regulation at that point. But, just an awesome experience. And then just, the crowd rushing the field, sharing that victory with us. I'll never forget that. That was kind of like the first of those signature wins that we had that year.
Yep. Down by 8, 28-20 with 2:11 left. And I know a lot of people were starting to find their way to the exits. And when we got the touchdown and 2-point conversion, I'm like, okay, just to get this game to overtime is a small victory. But as we talked about, Oregon State, a little bit of mismanagement of the clock that gave Louis a chance. You guys win that one 31-28. You're ranked 15th in the country at that point. And at that point, it seemed like the buzz really started, Mike. You got the win over Oregon State on a Thursday night at home. I know Coach Whittingham kind of did the circuit at ESPN the next week, and there was some buzz about that team. So you beat the Beavers, you win in Laramie 40-7. You take care of Colorado State 49-16. A bye week before you go to New Mexico, and this was another tight game that kind of snuck up on us, Mike. You had TCU coming in November 6th for a Thursday night game, but the week before we're on a Saturday night against the Lobos in Albuquerque. We had to hang on for a 13-10 win. But you guys got it done. A defensive, low-scoring game. You guys did your job, certainly on your side of the ball, and then the big game against TCU and that classic matchup at Rice-Eccles. Going into that TCU matchup, it was number 9 Utah, number 11 TCU. What do you remember of kind of that win against the Lobos and the hype going into that matchup against the Horned Frogs in early November?
Well, the win against the Lobos, I'll never forget Coach Whittingham after that game. Man, he was fired up, and he was, I think he was kind of recalibrating our where our heads were at going into that next week against TCU. That victory against New Mexico definitely felt like a loss. Not to discredit New Mexico at that point, but just what we were looking to accomplish that season. That wasn't our expectation going into that game as far as what the result was going to be. And so
yeah,
I remember Coach Witt just being very fired up and kind of let us have it as far as in the locker room. So what I remember specifically about that game was never, I can't remember another win that we had where I felt like we lost.
That's a good way to put it, because it didn't feel good,
Yeah, exactly. But I think that was a good gut check for us as far as kind of getting focused for TCU that following week, and we had to play them on a Thursday night, so we didn't have a lot of time to recover and watch film on TCU that particular game, and so and then also, Mike, you're gonna have to forgive me too with New Mexico. That was probably I probably maybe have one or too many shots to the head, and that was one of those games where I don't really remember a lot of it. I just kind of have to go based off of what people tell me, because Robert Johnson hit me blindsided as he kind of closed his eyes as he was coming to make a tackle, and then I only partially remember the portion of that game.
Oh wow.
So,
well, it was a forgettable game as it turned out. I mean, you nailed it right.
Yeah.
You never felt like you had a loss after a win like you did that night. So maybe it's best that you don't remember much about that game, because it was not pretty. But I hadn't heard that story about you and Robert Johnson. That's interesting. So obviously, you don't want to joke about stuff like that, but you kind of sucked it up and got it done and kept playing. It sounds like that night.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have like a diagnosed concussion or anything like that, but
yeah,
just definitely a little woozy. But like, if you watch it, we watched it on film over and over again. Robert made me do like a helicopter. He just came up from his free safety position, and I joked that he closed his eyes. I don't know. He probably did. He had to have, because I was about ready to make the tackle, and then he just comes and hits me on the side of the head, and I do a helicopter spin around, and And fortunately, I was able to get up after that. But he hit me pretty good. He hit me pretty good.
Yeah. Well, you guys get the win again over the Lobos by 3, and then TCU comes in, and you talked about the victory over Oregon State in that the 2-minute offense by Brian Johnson that night was spectacular. We saw more of that against the Horned Frogs as Brian drove the team 80 yards in the final minute or so, and the 9-yard touchdown strike to Freddie Brown on a slant. As Freddie lined up on the left side, went to the end zone, and the Utes beat the Horned Frogs 13-10. But I tell you what, Mike, the way that game started out, I wasn't feeling so good about things. The Horned Frogs got a field goal by Evans early, and then a touchdown run by Christian. And there's like 6 minutes and change left in the first quarter, and the Utes are down 10-0. And after that, you guys pitched a shutout. Talk about what was going on early in that game by the Horned Frogs and the adjustments Gary Anderson and crew made to hold them scoreless the rest of the game.
Yeah, I think for us in that game, we had underestimated the speed that TCU had on their offense. They had a lot of fast guys, and we hadn't as a defense faced off against an offense that had that many weapons and that much speed on that side of the ball. And so I think early on in that game was kind of us adjusting to the speed that they were throwing at us, and then just adjusting our game plan to just be able to compete with what they were doing offensively. So I think we kind of, I remember in the locker room at halftime, Coach Anderson just said, "Hey, you just took their best shot, and we're still in this, and we're still battling." I think it was 10-7 at halftime, if I remember right.
10-6.
10-6. I think we had a couple of field goals. I think Sean Smith had an interception that set up a field goal at the end of the first half.
Right.
So we were feeling better about the situation. But yeah, I mean, I think as players, we were getting a little nervous too after seeing what they were doing to us, moving the ball early on, and the speed that we were dealing with. But we were able to settle in and make some plays, and we were kind of, they call it the bamboo defense, is bend but don't break. And there was a lot of situations during the course of that game where they were moving the ball on us, and then we got into a third down situation, and Sly had a couple of sacks that game, and Paul Kruger had a couple of sacks that game. That just either was a big third down play, or even it was a third down play, and then it pushed him out of field goal range. We were able to keep points off the board. Their kicker missed a couple of field goals that he probably normally makes, and
right.
So we were fortunate in that case, but we were just able to keep within striking distance, and just kept competing. And like you said, Brian Johnson led that drive to get the win. So the TCU was definitely, I think, was the best team that we faced that year. I mean, I think that's saying a lot, because obviously we ended the year against Alabama, and I felt at least the competition level and what we saw from there. So I guess I should say the best offense.
Okay.
Was TCU.
Yep.
Just the speed that we were dealing with against them, and it was definitely one of the tougher games that year.
Yeah, I could certainly see Gary Patterson building the skill, as you mentioned, on offense, especially with that TCU team in 08. And you talked about the field goal, Sakota from 49 and 37 inside the final 3 minutes of the first half. And yeah, some key sacks in that second half. And I felt so bad for their freshman kicker, Evans. He made a field goal from 37 in the first quarter, then missed one wide, one side overcorrected, went wide the other way in that second half. A couple of field goals that later on in his career he made, but it seemed like the mental game was a bit of a challenge for him that night, and some key sacks, and you guys win that one again, 13-10, and a huge win at Rice Eccles. So you win that game. You're at this point ranked 7th in the country. You go to San Diego State. You throttle them 63-14, and then, of course, back in those days when Utah and BYU were in the same conference, whether it was the WAC or the Mountain West, you knew every year how the season was going to end. And that particular year was BYU coming to Rice Eccles on November 22nd. Utah ranked 7th, BYU ranked 14th that year. And always a huge game, a lot on the line for the Utes especially. And Mike, looking back at that game, which you guys won 48-24, what stands out about the build-up and the result of that victory over the Cougars?
Well, I think for that year, for us particularly, we had a lot of unfinished business. We talked about the '07 season, and we didn't talk about the '06 season. So that was the Harleen was still open season. So just with BYU coming into Rice Eccles, we were focused, and with what they do preparing, what Utah does preparing against BYU is we have a highlight reel. Playing in the halls and on our TVs in the locker room before we head out to practice, that just plays game clips. They play media clips. It's just kind of what the video team has put together, just to help players that either that have been with the program to remember what happened in years past, or just for people new, transfers and freshmen, to understand, what this game means, not only for people within the state, but what it means for the program, and just the rivalry and the history that's been between our two schools. And so for us, losing in the fashion that we did the 2 years before, it was something that we wanted to make sure that we got that victory, and we obviously knew what was on the other side of that for us is another opportunity at the BCS. And so, BYU had a tough team that year. I think at halftime it was tied at 28, if I remember right, or it was maybe not 28, but it was a tie game or a close game at halftime.
It was 27-17 at halftime. Yeah.
27-17. And so, but just as a tough game against BYU, but ultimately, the wheels came off for them in the second half as far as their execution offensively, and we were just able to I think I can't remember what the saying was from that game, but just Max Hall had 4 or 5 picks that seemed like
5 picks and 6 turnovers. He was giving them away that day.
Yeah, he was giving them away, and unfortunately, I wasn't able to get one of those, which I would have loved. But it was one of those kind of maybe not a nail biter, which we were happy about. Wasn't a nail biter towards the end. We were kind of able to enjoy that victory in the fourth quarter, and I never forget those games where the crowd rushes and celebrates with the team, is just very memorable. So that was another time where crowd rushed the field and celebrated, and it was being on the field with everybody, and just being able to be excited for what was to come later that year as far as getting a BCS bid was awesome.
Yeah, it was an impressive way to close out the season. And you were right. Utah scored 10 points in the final 141 of that first half. So I said it was 27-17 at the half. Well, it was tied at 17 all before the Utes got those final 10 points. And then Utah with 3 touchdowns in the fourth quarter to Castile, to Jopru, and Sampson to close that thing out. You had 9 tackles to lead the Utes in that win. And then Robert Johnson, Son Smith came up big with interceptions. Paul Kruger had one as well as he rumbled and tripped over his own tennis shoes or laces. Otherwise, he would have scored in that game. But just an impressive win. Again, the Utes take down the Cougars to close out the 08 regular season, 48-24. And then the big news comes. Utah at this point ranked 7th. Alabama was 4th. Alabama that year was ranked number 1 in the country 5 straight weeks. And I remember when we got the announcement of the BCS matchup, everyone was excited, a chance to go to the BCS for the second time in 5 years. And then you see Bama come up and you're like, oh my goodness, it's been a great year, but Utah was a 17-point underdog, Mike, going to that BCS Sugar Bowl game on January 2nd. As you guys had your month of preparation in December leading up to the bowl game, what was sort of the mood and the level of optimism amongst the guys head into that Bama matchup?
We were excited. I mean, I remember, we had the bid party or whatever we called it back then, but
yeah,
we were at Rice Eccles watching, all the matches, on TV, and them announcing all the matchups, like you said. And when Alabama showed up, we were stoked because what happened, I think, with the Fiesta Bowl team is, they had that great season, and then kind of at the end of the day, didn't really get an opportunity to prove to anybody, how good of a team they really were. Because that team, there's been a debate. Like I've seen the debates, over the while, like, who was the better team, the Sugar Bowl team, the Fiesta Bowl team. And, I think the difference, at the end of the day, as far as, who had the better, more historical season was that we got the opportunity to kind of prove, that we belonged with the big dogs as far as, with the matchup that we got. And so we were super stoked to get Alabama. And just that I remember that whole December, people were focused, watching film, and at least defensively going into that, the matchups that we were watching on film, and, we felt super confident going into that game. And I remember, kind of like you were talking, like we were 17-point underdogs. I remember, close friends that were going to be traveling to the game. They in December around Christmas time, we're like, hey, hey, Mike, just because you don't have to promise me a win, but just promise that it will be respectable. Just kind of like, if I travel to the game, just just make sure it's respectable, kind of thing, I laughed about it then, and I told him, I looked him straight in the face. I'm like, we're going to compete. We're ready to play, and I think from a defensive perspective, we were ready to go. But I even still, I watched that game, and just the way that our offense came to play in that first quarter, putting up 21 points in the first quarter was surreal. I mean, from even as a teammate. Obviously, playing against my teammates every day in practice, like I knew we had the talent to be able to do that, but we just hadn't seen that type of quarter and that type of offensive, dominance against those big time opponents. It kind of came in more, drive here, drive there, but just like with the game plan that we had set and having that type of offensive output in the first quarter was something we hadn't seen that entire season. Especially against, the big games that we had on our schedule, like, TCU, Michigan, the games that we talked about, Oregon State. We just we hadn't seen that from our offense. So after that first quarter, when we were up 21-0, like our confidence was at an all-time high. And, defensively, that just fed our defense as far as motivating us more, each and every play. And that was the mood, so like going into the game, as you kind of, to get back to your question, like the mood of the defense, we were ready. We wanted to prove that, we weren't a top 5, top 10 defense because we were playing teams in the Mountain West. We wanted to prove that didn't matter who we were playing, who we were lining up against, that we were, a top defense in the country that year. And so we were definitely excited, looking forward to that game.
The wild card in that game for me, Mike, was the no-huddle offense, and you talked about this. We saw that with Brian Johnson in the win late against Oregon State, saw more of that against TCU. I remember we did a little bit more no-huddle against BYU, but really the Alabama game was the first game where they said, we're coming out with it, and the result was a 21-0 lead to start the game. Brian was on fire. Bama's defense that year was number 3 in the country coming in. They had just not given up much, and Brian that game went 27 for 41, 336 yards and 3 touchdowns, and the defense was spectacular as well. You guys had 8 sacks of quarterback John Parker Wilson. Stevenson Sylvester had 3 that night. Robert Johnson a couple picks, and you guys shut down their run game. They came in averaging, Mike, 196 yards per game on the ground. They got just 31 against you guys. You had 7 tackles that game, and it just seemed like between the offense with the statement in the first quarter, the defense flying around, Alabama, even though they had kind of that spurt, second, third quarters, they just never got to rhythm, and you guys win that game, 31-17, a comfortable win as it turned out against a team, as I said, that was ranked number 1 in the country 5 weeks that year. Late in the game, Mike, Alabama made the run. We thought they would. They were a talented team. But you guys, took care of business and got the win handily. At what point, Mike, did you feel like we've got this thing? At what point were you kind of like, this game's over, Utes are going to win, we're 13-0. At what moment did that sink into you?
Well, there was a couple plays in the fourth quarter. There was one big play that didn't happen in the fourth quarter, Mike, and this is something that still gives me nightmares, was on third down. I had a pick six that I just dropped.
That's right. Oh, I forgot about that.
They had ran a play that they had run a play that they had scored their touchdown on the short field. Coming into the third quarter, we had a fumble that set them up where they were on like the 10 or 15 yard line. They had a short field to get that one touchdown that they had in the second half, and they ran a play where Glenn Coffey or Ingram came out of the backfield and was wide open in the end zone.
Yeah, it was Coffey. Yep.
Because we were in a man coverage and couldn't fight through the defense, and so kind of got the from preparing on film and things like that. You can kind of just from their formation know what plays to expect, and so when they got in that formation, I saw that and I expected that, and I just made the right read, cut off the route, and just dropped the ball. And, it still turned out to be a big play because it was third down. We forced a punt there, and but I think the big play was Sean Smith's sack with Sylvester getting the fumble recovery. That set up a field goal for us, and when we had that, I think once we got that field goal, I was feeling pretty good about what was going to happen the rest of that game, just because we had such a good game plan going into that game. We had brand new schemes just for Alabama. So I don't know if Coach Anderson gets the credit he deserves for that game plan that we had for that game. We had a whole new scheme just for Alabama, something that we hadn't done that entire season, and it obviously played out great for that particular game. And so the way that our coaching staff, Coach Anderson in particular, had us ready for that game was huge. And so just the way that we were playing defensively, once we got that field goal, pretty much knew the game was pretty well in hand at that point.
I'd heard about that scheme as well, and it's interesting because Gary Anderson at that point was ready to leave and become the head coach of Utah State, so he was kind of juggling a bunch of things. But can you give us any insight on that scheme change to the defense for that Bama game?
I remember a little bit of it, but it was just our run fits and the way that our coverages were on the back end. We knew they had Julio Jones, who was a freshman that year.
Mm-hmm.
We felt really good about Sean Smith and how he was going to match up with as far as size against Julio and speed. But and you watch that game back, and there was a couple times where he got free, and we were fortunate enough to have enough pressure on Wilson that he overthrew him a couple of times. But we just had we utilized our personnel with Robert Johnson in the post, and he had a couple of picks that game. We just kind of mixed things up a little bit from what we had done and what we were seeing on film. They ran a lot of 2 tight end sets, and they just the keys that we would get from those sets from Alabama helped us with our run fits. It helped us with our coverages in the back end. And so I can't remember the particulars, but I do remember that it was unique for Alabama, and those particular keys that we were getting from them, really set us up for success. And in getting those sacks, and how their cover or how their O-line was protecting, we knew that we could take advantage of on the edges with those particular linebacker blitzes that we had with Sylvester getting a couple sacks and Keppa Geisen getting a couple sacks from that. So we had a lot of we were able to get a lot of pressure on the quarterback with our scheme against them. We were able to have better coverages in the back end, and then, like you said, with the way that we held them, their rushing attack to 30, 40 yards. That was all due to that scheme that we had prepared that whole week of the whole month of December, that Coach Anderson had put together. And so, like I said, I don't think that gets talked about enough. Like, I think people just say that, we came to play and that was obvious, but it was really the scheme and the coaching staff, what they had put together for that game, that we were to be, as successful as we were.
Well, as you and I talked, Mike, kind of at the top of the podcast, 9 guys from that defense play at the next level in the NFL. And I thought that game in particular against an SEC team that was so highly regarded, and you guys were healthy. You had some fortunate breaks that year in the sense there were no breaks. You stayed healthy and kept your guys intact. And I thought that game in particular, that the talent really showed through against a very talented Alabama team and just never really let them get in sync. You guys scored the final 10 points and win that one 31-17. It's a crowning moment to go undefeated, especially to end it the way you guys did with the win over Alabama. An undefeated season, a Sugar Bowl win. You guys ended up number 2 in the final national polls, highest finish in school history, and just a magical year. Mike, we kind of looked back at all the games and the key moments. As you look back at your teammates that year and some moments you guys shared at practice, in the locker room, on the plane, what are some moments on a personal level that stand out with that group in 2008?
The amount of chemistry that we had in our locker room that year, we had it, the whole program. You hear it still, Coach Whittingham, we break the huddle with family. And that's, what it feels like. There's some of my teammates that I haven't seen for years, and we'll get together. We have a golf tournament every year for, right before the spring game. And, it's guys I haven't seen for years. We pick up right where we left off, from the locker room, being on the field together, like no time has passed by. And just, I just won't forget the workouts, the blood, sweat, and tears that we put into practice, during the games, all of that, that's just, that's stuff that, saying, like you have friends, you have, brothers, and then you have teammates, and, teammates just means so much more, within the Utah football program, than it does, I would assume, other places. So very, very fortunate for the, program and culture that Kyle Whittingham put together. And I'm confident it's still, the same way, with the team today. But yeah, just forged lifelong friendships. And like I said, I don't maybe talk to all my teammates, on a daily basis or even a weekly or monthly. But anytime I see some of those guys, it's just like, we're back in 2008, 2009. And, we're talking about games that we played and just moments in those games. It's funny, like all the details that you remember about specific games. But it's just, it was fun, and so just, it's been, just an awesome experience, and, just forged, lifelong friendships from my time up at the U.
Such a special year. 12 years ago, the 2008 Sugar Bowl team for the Utes, their second BCS bowl berth and win. During that stretch, it was certainly a game that established Kyle Whittingham as a premier head coach. And a lot of people say, Mike, that, to do it just once, the Fiesta Bowl season in 04 was great, but to do it, twice in 5 years, certainly when the Pac-12 was looking to expand from 10 to more, the football success played a lot in that decision. On top of the great research institution that Utah is, the academics and the broad success of the programs. But to be good in football at that time, it could not have come at a better time. And then certainly a couple years later, in 2010, Utah invited to the Pac-12 conference where they are now. And what a special year, 13-0, the Utes in 2008, number 2 ranking. And just a special time. Well, Mike, we appreciate you taking some time to look back on that year with us. You, of course, came back for one more year in 2009, a 10-3 season. Pretty good year by most standards. A win over Cal in the Poinsettia Bowl to cap off your career. And for you, a 2-time honorable mention All-Mountain West pick. And great run by you. And Mike, we appreciate you taking some time to look back on that 2008 season and your career with us. For fans who've lost track of you, what are you up to now and what keeps you busy?
Yeah, I work as a software salesman. I work for a company called Pluralsight based here in Utah, and own and operate a fizz soda shop in Sandy. So, people here in Utah like their sodas.
They sure do.
I like to give it to them. So that's what I'm doing. And just had my family, I have 3 kids. and live in Riverton. So just living the American dream these days.
Well, a lot of time at home for all of us. I know you've been working from home like a lot of us have during the coronavirus pandemic. And unfortunately, we found out last week that our football season for the fall has been postponed. We're hoping to get things going in the spring. Quick thought, Mike, before I let you go. If you would have been a player during this time frame to have started spring practice, to go on spring break, to be sent home, to be gearing up for a season over the summer, to lose it and have some uncertainty, what's some of the thoughts that would be going through your mind at this point if you were still on the team? It's been a lot for these guys to handle the last 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, no, I think as a player, I think, this time would be extremely hard. I feel bad for these guys, especially those that, were, juniors and seniors, the upperclassmen. This will be a challenge. I think with all college football players. I think, the question then becomes of their future. If they're pursuing an NFL career, what does this upcoming season in the spring look like for them? If at all, you might see a lot of career decisions made in the spring to forego their senior year where they otherwise would have played. And guys like, Joe Burrow, who was probably like going to be, maybe a undrafted free agent signing. He wasn't on top of anyone's draft boards, but
No.
after his senior year, he became the first overall pick. And so you have, potentially guys like that who, are going to miss out on an opportunity to prove themselves for the next level. And so as a player, it just would be tough. It's tough to be, focused and, really take that season seriously too, especially with, other power conferences that would potentially play in the fall. It's just going to be a really interesting time to see how it all shakes out. But from a player's perspective, I feel for those guys, and I hope that, everything works out for them, and particularly, me as a former player and a fan. Like, I'm disappointed that, we're not gonna have college football that I really ultimately care about in the fall. But hopefully there is some football played, and so as a fan we have that. But I'm looking. I hope that everything works out well for these guys, especially those that are looking to kind of take their career into the NFL and just anyway, there's a lot to be said about what's going on right now, but without getting too far into it, I hope it all works out, and I hope it the kids and their future are part of the decision making process, and there's a lot that goes into it. And so, hopefully it all works out.
Certainly complex times, but it's been fun doing this series of podcasts and reliving some great moments and talking to people like yourself, Mike, as you came on and talked about the 08 season and your career today. And you did a great job. I told you top of the broadcast, hey, no one-word answers. I got everything but that from you today. So great job, and appreciate your insights and your thoughts, and missing you around the hallways of the Huntsman Center, but I know you're doing well with your career, and your family's great. So Mike Wright, former all-conference linebacker for the Utes, thanks for joining us, and best of luck to you down the road, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Lags. Appreciate the time.
All right, thank you. Mike Wright, former linebacker for the Utes, back to wrap up the show in just a moment.
For more on Utah athletics, including up-to-date schedules and ticket information, log on to utahutes.com. Now back to more of Utes Insider presented by Pepsi.
Well, great to catch up with Mike Wright, a former two-time honorable mention All-Mountain West pick for the Utes, who played from 06 to 09. And I mentioned all the big-time names on that defense that he played with. 9 guys from that 08 team went to the NFL from the defensive side. But, guys like Mike who are around and had to really earn it a little bit more than some. An in-state kid who knew the history of Utah football, wanted so desperately to play for the Utes and do his thing here in the state of Utah. And he got his chance. And, guys like that, I'm not saying others don't appreciate it, but I think guys like Mike do just a little bit more because they had to work for it and had to go through more to get to where they ended up. And to see Mike Wright become such a key part of those defenses in 08 and 09, and what a run for him. I mean, the 07 season, 9 wins. They won 13 undefeated in 08, a 10-win season in 2009, 6-2 in conference, and a great career by Mike Wright, former linebacker from Bountiful, who is keeping busy with his business in sales and with the soda shop, makes his home in Riverton, and great to catch up with Mike Wright on this edition of Utes Insider. Well, that will do it for our show today and for our shows for the month of August. We're going to have a lot more time than we thought we would in the month of September, as well as October and November as well. So we'll have more podcasts coming your way this fall. That will do it for the month of August, as I mentioned. Thank you to Mike Gilliland on the technical side. That will do it for this show. I'm Mike Lagashow. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, so long, everybody.
This has been Utes Insider presented by Pepsi. To hear more episodes of this show and other Utah athletics podcasts, search for them on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube.